Hello and welcome to Charity Pulse, your regular update on news and happenings in the charity sector and the podcast where purpose meets personality. I'm James Saunders, I'm a partner at Moore Kingston Smith, and I'm joined as ever by my co-hosts Catherine Rustomji, partner and head of charities at Shakespeare Martineau, and Charles Mesquita, charities director at Quilter Cheviot. We're going to dive into the heart of the charity sector, unpack those big issues and spotlight unsung heroes, share the stories that matter. You may be listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, any of our respective organisations' websites. However you're listening, you're very welcome. Please don't forget to like and follow, subscribe, and generally hit any positive feedback button you can. Well, the last time I was in the big chair, I was talking about the knives being brought out for the Prime Minister. And 6 weeks later, the knives have plunged into their target and he's gone. So that's how quickly things move in politics. We're also in the middle of an absolute heat wave. So let's get underway before we all drip away in a puddle of sweat. The business at hand, this last couple of weeks, several new regulatory investigations and cases emerging this week. Charity Commission's opening statutory inquiries over, again, it continues to be trustee unauthorised payments, conflicts of interest. They really are the absolute key at the moment, and obviously spending concerns, wider governance issues coming in as well. The first order of business this week, let's just return to politics for a second. It won't have passed anyone by, I'm sure, that the government is going to need to spend more on defence, allocate more money to the defence, the Ministry of Defence. So the question is some of that money going to come from the charity sector? It has been reported that Lisa Nandy, Secretary of State for Culture, including charities, seems to think that her budget may well be cut. Is the Prime Minister's resignation going to change things further? At the same time, Pro Bono Economics, this last couple of weeks, reporting that the Iran war in particular has increased cost of living pressures on people, and that is affecting charities as well. So really, is there even more of a cut in the charity funding from local government, and because of the cost of living challenges underway? Charles, I'll come to you first on that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, we obviously with Keir Starmer resigning, I think everything's going to be put on hold, isn't it, until they have the new person in place who may or may not be Andy Burnham, and we really don't know what his plans are. To be perfectly frank, he's going to have the same problems that Keir Starmer has, that he's got very little wiggle room to do anything. DCMS's budget is somewhere between 7 and 8 billion a year. I mean, I think it's interesting that Lisa Nandy's obviously got a messaging sort of when she talks about more resources away from the department, like Department for Culture, Media and Sport, in order to keep the UK safe. So I think, yes, I mean, the pressure is just going to continue for charities, I'm afraid to say, but that was going to be inevitable, and I suspect they're going to need to make some hard choices. The question is whether they're prepared to make them.
Catherine,
I thought it was interesting, she talks about the first duty of any government to keep this country safe. But I do remember during COVID, the number of times people say, never again will we accept the answer that we haven't got funding for that. Because when they want to, the government can find funding for anything. I thought it was more interesting to see how far down the pecking order the charitable sector is in this country, that we're easy targets to say, oh, we'll have a bit of your budget, because we doubt very much anybody's even going to notice or bother or resist it. I just think it's the taking for granted that continues by this government and others to say all of the essential services that are provided by different charitable and cultural organisations, and just looking at if we just need to move money around, we'll have a bit of theirs. I thought it was quite a sad indictment, and I thought as the minister, surely she should be defending the importance of her portfolio rather than just rolling over and having a tummy tickled.
Well, she was defending the BBC though, wasn't she? Which I suppose is good in the respect of what the BBC does. But you're right. I mean, charities don't have votes, although 2.4 million people who are estimated to be working in the not-for-profit sector, which I know is not just charities, is quite a significant part of the electorate. And the other thing, of course, of governments have I suppose devolved quite a lot of funding down to local authorities. So it's the local authorities that'll get the grief for not supplying the services rather than central government. So yeah, I mean, you're right.
I'm
It's
not
one
sure,
that's
Charles,
going to
there's
have
much
less
money to be
resistance.
taken back from local government. They haven't got any anyway. And talking about people working in the voluntary sector, again, Pro Bono Economics this last couple of weeks has released some research. Charity sector workers suffered a 1.2% pay reduction over the last decade. Private sector wages in the same period have grown by 10%. So clearly a real differential between pay growth or lack of growth for voluntary sector workers over that period. Should there be a pay restoration campaign like resident doctors, nurses, Charles?
Well, I don't wish to argue against eminent economists, as the Pro Bono Economics is, or Matt Whitaker, but I'm not sure it tells the full story. So, since the financial crisis of 2008, UK wage inflation has stagnated full stop. Prior to that, I think 2008, we saw growth of about 1.7% in wage inflation. I think it's very difficult to separate out the charity sector and the private sector and the public sector. I mean, you will know, James, just in your business of having a shortage of accountants and how that led to quite a wage inflation within certain sectors, and that would have been with IT. But I think there are lots of complicated and moving parts going on. And we've got something like just over 9 million who are economically unactive between the ages of 16 and 64. Now, admittedly, 2.3 to 2.5 is in full-time education, and only 1.8 million are unemployed. I think the big growth has been around those who are off on long-term sick. And I think that was happening before COVID. And of course, the other issues you've got is aging population, people staying more in work because they're having to financially. You've also got economically, people have actually retired earlier. So I'm going to counter what I've just said in that it's not worth working because of the increases of cost. So there's a lots of complexity there, which I don't think you can sort of put in a simple thing. The one thing I would say is
campaigning for a pay restoration then immediately.
No, but I do think there is a fundamental problem that people working in the charity sector are expected to be paid less than the equivalent job in the private or local authorities.
Okay.
And I do think the government doesn't help that in the way that they go around procurement and they're trying to get everything on the cheap. So, I mean, they're right to raise it, but it is a really difficult. And I know as a trustee, when we're talking about wages and pay and everything else, we're very cost of the cost of employment.
Yeah. Okay. Turning to trustee related matters more, Catherine, there have been a number recently of challenges to charity commission decisions, specifically charity commission decisions to ban trustees. So just in this last week or so, the Al Tawheed Foundation, two trustees, either the charity or the trustees, not quite sure which, it's not quite clear which, but they're challenging the Charity Commission's decision to ban them as trustees. And the Naomi Campbell case is in the news again. I mean, it's in the news because it's newsworthy, and it's in the news because it's a celebrity case as well. The Charity Commission, if you remember, said she's unfit to run a charity. Naomi Campbell herself says she was a victim of fraud and deception. So there's two sides being fought out in the press at the moment. Where do you stand on this, Catherine? As far as you can see from the reporting, so remind you, the case at the moment, the appeal is going through against the Charity Commission decision.
Yeah, and I would agree with you that I think there is more of a movement towards, if people are not happy with a ruling from the Charity Commission, they're more likely to challenge it. I think we are seeing more of this kind of litigious response of take it to the tribunal and let's see whether the Charity Commission followed their own processes and proved the arguments justifying disqualification. So I do think there is an increase in that. The Naomi Campbell case, I have one of my clients who loves to hear about it anyway, because he always says to me, did she adopt a model constitution? And then we just have a little giggle for a while. But I thought with hers, the response that she was giving to ultimately her being an absolutely useless charity trustee seems to be that she's been the victim of forged documents and emails. But the response was that has absolutely nothing to do with whether she was discharging her duties in this voluntary position that she chose to take on when she should have been acting in the charity's best interest throughout and discharging those duties and responsibilities. So when I was looking at her case, more so, I was picking up some of the stats that essentially it seemed to have been an events organization that was organizing different very high profile events, and only 10% of the proceeds from which went to charities. And I think that does not a charity make. You know, if you tried to register a charity today using those stats and explanations, you wouldn't get it registered. And I also don't think you would necessarily get it registered with a high profile person living in America being one of the trustees, because the query would be, you know, do they have time to discharge their duties in this role? So, you know, I do think there is potentially a wider lesson here, but it's definitely catching the eye, isn't it? That we're getting more and more stories from that one.
Yeah. I mean, there were the first case of this overturning of the ban was that, if you remember, we talked about it before. I think it was a Gary Mond case, wasn't it, where he successfully got his ban overturned. I wonder if that has, and there was the Parliamentary Health and Safety Ombudsman also criticised the Charity Commission recently. I wonder how much of that, perhaps the authority of the Charity Commission, has been diminished by these, these cases brought against them. Charles, any thoughts on what Catherine is saying?
I mean, I just find it slightly surprising half the time that people are bringing these cases against the commission, because they're voluntary roles, and if you look at where the cost is, you go to the tribunal, both parties have to pay irrespective, so it's not like a normal court of things. I worry about the time and the cost to the commission, because that means it's taking them away from what we need them to be doing, and we certainly hear charities find it quite frustrating about the speed of which they get responses from the commission. Well, this will be doing nothing more to slowing it down. But I thought the Campbell case, I was the Guardian article had some fantastic sort of quotes. So Faisal Sadiq, who was the acting for the commission, stated that he told the tribunal that Campbell, who gave evidence on Tuesday, was an entirely unreliable witness who, while not actively dishonest, had said a number of things that simply were not true in her evidence. Rather than honesty and accuracy, her focus was on controlling the media narrative. I mean, I think that's pretty damning. I know her KC came back and said Westwood rejected Sadiq's hyperbolic assertions that Campbell's conduct, the commission inquiry, was flawed but in Campbell, it had got its high-profile scalp and was determined to hang on to it at any cost. I think that's a bit unfair. The commission, certainly from my experience, and you've got Catherine nodding here, are always pretty fair and want to be even-handed. So they don't generally, from my impression, ever want to go for a high thing scalp. But
it does go to show that these things spiral out of anyone's original intention or control, doesn't it? I mean, this is very much the way of the modern world in social media, in the fake news argument. I mean, as you said, Charles, it's hyperbole on both sides. There isn't a sensible discussion here. It's really fantastic stuff. It's moving beyond sensible, realistic discussion.
But it's interesting because the two other trustees haven't challenged the commission's ruling, and one of those trustees has paid back £316,000, which sort of tells you quite a lot, I think. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the case, but you do wonder. And for somebody like Naomi Campbell, does she really want this raked through the media again?
Yeah. Okay. Moving on a bit, there was another charity commission investigation has started into City and Guilds, the sale of their trading business, the training business that was run by the charity, to an organisation called People Cert. And there seems to be a very murky situation with regard to some large, allegedly, potentially unauthorized bonuses being paid to chief exec and finance director of the organization. Now, I think there's three different inquiries or investigations going on here. I think City and Guilds have done one. I think People Cert are doing another from their respective perspectives. And then the one that we probably ought to look at for our purposes is the Charity Commission investigation. And that is specifically looking around the trustees' decision to sell the training business, um, and whether it was appropriately completed, and whether they had all the information, had sought to get all the information that they should have had when making the decision. And I think this comes about from there seems to be a complete a suggestion that no one seemed to know about these bonuses until they got paid on either side. So it's what I say, it's all a little bit murky. Um, Catherine, specifically on the question of the Charity Commission investigation into the trustees' decision making and how that was done, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this one I think is such a depressing story that we've got such a high profile, respected brand of City and Guilds in the UK and a charity, and then just absolutely being dragged through the mud for this. And interestingly, having looked at charity sector pay, to then read that the chief executive was given a 1.7 million pound bonus, the FD was given a 1.2 million pound bonus. They both had huge salary increases, one to £430,000, the other one to £300,000. This is not normal, usual, good practice. This is not what we want to be the story in relation to any charity. But I did look at that, and I thought the members of City and Guilds were also really bring themselves together to say, we want an internal investigation because we want to know what the members were told. So there's also what the trustees were informing themselves about and who was telling them that, and then what decision making has been taken within the charity and whether those were informed decisions, whether there was sufficient due diligence, whether they were deliberately misled, or was there any sort of negligence by the trustees. So all of that is now going to be literally poured over to see how these decisions were reached and ultimately whether it was in the best interests of the charity's beneficiaries, because that's where all of this seems to be a long way away from, there were some explanations about why the sale was required, but you've blown all of that out of the water now with these excessive, it seems to be, bonuses. And then the new owner saying, well, now we've got to do redundancies because it's not what we thought it was, the union getting involved. It just goes from bad to worse.
Yes, I didn't include that in the little summary at the beginning, did I? The union has, it seems, successfully campaigned against the proposed redundancies, which is a good result. But it just adds to the murkiness, really, of quite how this has all come about. Protection, supposedly a protected business being moved, which suddenly had a load of redundancies, which is what the promise was that it definitely wouldn't do. So the whole thing just seems just really poorly managed all around. And as you say, Catherine, brings a very good charity brand into close to disrepute. Charles, your
Yeah, I
thoughts?
mean, so putting this into perspective, you've got the sale price was something like 180, 200 million, although I don't know why the charity's going to get 166 million, and there were some legitimate business reasons of why they wanted to sell it. One was about in need for significant investment. But, looking at what the trustees have said about their defense is that the sale followed a competitive process. They acted to protect the charity's future. Well, okay, fine. They were not involved in the negotiations of post-sale bonuses by People Cert, and any bonus arrangements made by the purchaser were separate from the charity's own decisions. And you think, really? Does that then become a bribe? But then they go on and say, well, they were aware of it. It was discussed, but ultimately abandoned, and no charity-funded incentive payments were made. So it's absolutely remarkable. on that basis. So no wonder the Commission is having a problem with
I'm
it.
not surprised either. It isn't clear from the news reports who knew, because both parties, it seems to be the seller and the buyer, seem to be denying any knowledge of these bonuses, which is would be
Well,
very strong.
who paid them?
Well,
That would be the question. Then we'll know who agreed them.
yeah,
So if it was paid by people served, must have agreed it.
yeah.
I don't. Yeah. So I think it's a lesson to all trustees, is that when you're going through things, you need to have make sure you are independently advised, and that you know exactly what the terms are.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of other stories just to round off this episode. Card Factory, the retailer, they've got a charitable foundation. They've overhauled their community fund to offer a smaller number of larger grants to charities. So, having previously offered grants around 5,000, they're going to be 25 unrestricted grant. Unrestricted, it's good. Unrestricted, no. I would say, I will ask you if it's good or not. 25 unrestricted grants of 10,000 when the community fund opens. So, slight change in tax. Is this, Catherine, to you again? Is this good? Is this the norm? This firstly move maybe to unrestricted, maybe to a smaller number of larger grants. What do you think?
It is interesting, isn't it? And I do wonder if there is an element of grant makers often saying we used to give grants of up to X, and now, whether it's cost of living, whether it's inflation, those amounts are too small now. And so we need to increase the level to keep pace with that. So I can understand that. But when I first read it, thought it's a bit of a shame, because Card Factory itself is such a UK-wide organisation that I imagine there will be many charities that would apply to them for support. Previously, they awarded 50 grants, and now it will be 25. So I was thinking there's potentially a lot of disappointed smaller charities that may have been funded by them in the past. Also, they talk about an annual income of less than 3 million. I mean, even up to 3 million, you can be a chunky sized charity operating at that level. And I'm not sure 10,000 is necessarily going to touch the sides of that. But I can understand why grant makers are then looking at their own processes and decision making and how to be more effective. And it is for them to decide, well, this is how we're doing it. We're setting out our stall to do that.
Charles, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be a radical change in grant makers and the way they do things. I think the problem is I'm actually really pro them giving more money rather than less, and I accept Catherine's comment that it means that less organisations are going to get. But one of the problems is that the cost of people applying for those grants and the number of applications they have to put out, and just getting in small amounts of money, you wonder whether it's worth it. And I think there just needs to be a significant change in the way that charities are funded. I know with Glassball, we've completely turned it around and, look to have a commitment to 49 organizations where they know how much money is, and we're not going through this process every year. So for my mind, anything that improves that efficiency, so more money is going to the beneficiaries, is a big tick in my book. And on the unrestricted, absolutely. And also helping pay for core costs. That's the other conversation we don't seem to have.
Yep. Good. Last one, just very quickly. The King's Honours the King's Birthday Honours list was released. Plenty of charity sector individuals in there, very well represented, which is good to see. No matter what you think about the celebrity element of the King's Honours, actually, see those in the voluntary sector, I'm always interested to see them, and I think they're all very, very well deserved in nearly all cases. Just personally, well done, Naomi Holston from Catch 22. Very, very excellent charity, very well led. Catherine, anyone that particularly
I
caught your
did.
eye?
So I'm a trustee of a charity called Charities Trust, and our chief executive was made an MBE, Linda Minnis. And I just thought it was such an endorsement. It said, in recognition of her outstanding services to the charity sector and corporate philanthropy, because she has worked for just countless years in that field. And I think to get that recognition, as those awards do, I just think it's fantastic to see.
We won't ask Victor Meldrew what he thinks, because we know what he thinks.
No. I'm sorry. I give him a round of applause. I think absolutely, it's great having people in the charity sector being recognised for the amazing work they're doing.
Excellent. That is, I think, all we've got time for this week. We've covered an awful lot there. So thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Charles. And thank you to the listener for tuning into this episode of Charity Pulse. We hope we were vaguely entertaining, insightful. Hopefully you've got a better understanding of some of the matters that have been going on recently, whether you're a charity professional or a passionate volunteer or simply someone who cares about making a difference. We do try and get something in there for all of you. Please don't forget to follow us, leave a review, share our podcast with your network, and join us next time as we continue to explore the challenges and opportunities facing the non-profit sector. Bye-bye for now.